your journey into the heart and soul of Greece. And now, member-supported Hellenic Public Radio Cosmos FM 91.5, a bilingual Greek-American radio program coming to you every day through WNYE 91.5 FM. From the Demetrius and Georgia Kaloidis Broadcasting Studios to the greater New York area and worldwide through cosmosfm.org. Our programs air Monday through Friday from 7 to 8 p.m., Saturdays from noon to 3:30 p.m., and Sunday mornings from 9 to 1:30 p.m.
This broadcast of Cosmos FM is paid for by the Greek American Educational Public Information System, Incorporated.
Ο τύραννος κλονείται, την πτώση του φοβείται, ο ζήλος της πατρίδος σας λάμψει σας ψυχάς, ο ζήλος της πατρίδος σας λάμψει σας ψυχάς. Μη φοβήστε Γρεκοί, ότι είστε τα ολίγη, η Ευρώπη σαν καλά στις ανοίγει. Εις φάλακας ταχθείτε, γεντέρος πολεμείτε, ο ζήλος της πατρίδος σας λάμψει σας ψυχάς, ο ζήλος της πατρίδος σας λάμψει σας ψυχάς.
200 years ago this month, the Greek people rose up against their Ottoman overlord and launched a war of independence and a revolution. It was neither the first nor the last uprising, but it became the moment in which a nation reappeared on the pages of history. Tonight we celebrate the words of the forerunners and leaders of this fateful event. Join me for the path to 1821, next on a special edition of Musical Masterworks. Cosmos FM.
Support for Cosmos FM is made possible by the support of our members and contributions from... At Investors Bank, one of our goals is helping businesses grow. Whether your company needs an equipment loan, line of credit, or real estate financing, Investors Bank can help. Because our lending decisions are made locally, our bankers can respond quickly with financing solutions to meet your company's needs. 855-I-BANK4U or online at myinvestorsbank.com. Investors Bank. Banking in your best interest. Member FDIC Equal Housing Lender. NMLS ID number 41179. The Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce invites you to a conversation on the effects of COVID on commercial and residential New York real estate. Moderated by Emmanuel Kokinakis, partner of Mega Development and Mega Contracting Group. On Thursday, March 18th at 4 p.m. No admission fee is required. For more information and to register, visit www.hellenicamerican.cc. The Peter Agris Memorial Journalism Communication Scholarships recently kicked off its 29th year of providing critical financial aid to aspiring Greek-American journalists, communications, and media specialists. The program will be accepting applications through March 31st. For criteria, the application, and requirements, visit www.alphaomegacouncil.com.
Cosmos FM, η πιο ισχυρή εγκεφαλική τροφή.
Musical Masterworks, a program dedicated to the rediscovery of great symphonic, instrumental, choral, operatic, cinematic, and electronic compositions from antiquity to the present, with your host, Mike Stratis. Welcome to a special edition of Musical Masterworks. I originally intended to scope out the major uprisings of the Greek nation from the fall of Constantinople to the eve of independence. as well as the written word of the great forerunners and leaders of the struggle. But I then realized such an enterprise would be too big and fully deserving of its own program. I therefore decided to go to the sources. Tonight, we look at the powerful words of the generation that inspired and guided the War of Independence, interspersed with the genuine musical pieces of the era. We begin with Adamantios Korais. Adamantios Korais was the Greek scholar credited with laying the foundations of modern Greek literature and a major figure in the Greek Enlightenment. His activities paved the way for the Greek War of Independence and the emergence of a purified form of the Greek language known as the Katharevousa. The Encyclopedia Britannica asserts that his influence on the modern Greek language and culture has been compared to that of Dante on Italian and Martin Luther on German. Korais believed Western Europe was the heir of the ancient Greek civilization, which had to be transmitted to the modern Greeks through education. Additionally, he advocated the restoration and the use of the term Hellene, Hellenas, or Grekos as an ethnonym for the Greeks, in the place of Romios that was seen negatively by him. While in Paris, he was witness to the French Revolution. He was influenced by the revolutionary and liberal sentiments of his age. He admired Thomas Jefferson and exchanged political and philosophical thoughts with the American statesman. A typical man of the Enlightenment, Korais encouraged wealthy Greeks to open new libraries and schools throughout Greece. Korais also believed that education would ensure not only the achievement of independence, but also the establishment of a proper constitution for the new liberated Greek state. He envisioned a democratic Greece, recapturing the glory of the golden age of Pericles. Korais went on to publish in 1803 his Report on the Present State of Civilization in Greece, based on a series of lectures he had given in Paris, extolling the link between the rise of a new Greek mercantile class and the advance of the Greek Enlightenment. In it, Korais is inspiring the development of a new nation on the European model. Once again, Korais knew that the way to truly liberate the Greek was through education. Intelligent Greeks, he says, considered the Europeans as debtors who were repaying with substantial interest the capital which they had received from the Greeks, their own ancestors. Another goal he emphasized is that the Greeks must become Philhellenes. The devotion of the whole race to the glorious renaissance of ancient wisdom will achieve the desired goal. Let me now read from his report. In the middle of the last century, the Greeks constituted a miserable nation who suffered the most horrible oppression and experienced the nefarious effects of a long period of slavery. There yet remained in the nation's midst a very small number of schools in which a very small number of Greeks acquired only the most superficial knowledge of the Greek language. The rest of the nation was condemned to the crassest ignorance and to the reading of books, acquaintance with which is worse than non-acquaintance. About that period, learning in a large part of Europe takes a new orientation, to which the French philosophers more than others contributed. The Encyclopédie was the effect of this new orientation, becoming afterwards the reason for its continuance. Some rays of this enlightenment escape and penetrate into Greece. Greece does not close her eyes to these rays, but she is still too weak and too poor fully to welcome and withstand their brilliance. Extraordinary circumstances on the one hand open new channels for trade in the Levant, and on the other bring about a war which ends by dissipating all the prestige which surrounded Ottoman power. Following these two developments, the Greeks, hitherto stricken, raise their heads in proportion as their oppressors' arrogance abates and their despotism becomes somewhat mitigated. This is the veritable period of Greek awakening. Minds emerging from their lethargy are amazed to observe this deplorable state, and that same national vanity which had hitherto prevented them from seeing it now increases their amazement and irritation. For the first time the nation surveys the hideous spectacle of its ignorance and trembles in measuring with the eye the distance separating it from its ancestors' glory. This painful discovery, however, does not precipitate the Greeks into despair. We are the descendants of Greeks, they implicitly told themselves. We must either try to become again worthy of this name, or we must not bear it. From that moment the ancient schools began to be reconstituted, and new ones came to swell their numbers. Young men expatriate themselves in order to learn the languages and acquire the learning of the enlightened nations of Europe. They are hardly back home when they are placed in charge of national education. Through their oral tuition,
and their translation of various foreign books, the nation becomes educated and increasingly feels the need of more education. All this takes place slowly, but uninterruptedly. The French Revolution comes at last and, as might be expected, does not fail to give a new impulse to the moral revolution which had already begun among the Greeks, an impulse all the stronger in being accompanied by a hope for the improvement of Greek fortunes. Spirits become restless from this new shock and attain such exaltation as to produce prodigies of valor in a few places and vast plans over the greater extent of Greece. The Greeks, seeing the astonishing successes of the French armies as simply the effects of enlightenment, seek proportionately to their admiration for these successes to multiply educational openings. The translation of foreign books, begun in the first period of the nation's awakening, has never been carried on with greater vigor than during and after the French Revolution. It may be said without exaggeration that during the 10 years of this revolution, which were also the last 10 years of the last century, more books containing teachings in various subjects appeared in Greece than had appeared during all the time that elapsed from the destruction of the Eastern Empire. The French Revolution is at an end, and some time before this revolution, the Russians had agreed to make peace with the Turks. But the effects which these two events produced over Greek minds subsist, and it is the less probable that they would disappear now that the Greeks have more financial resources and are more educated. The small number of books, ignorance of printing techniques, and bad communications formerly prevented the people from being enlightened and from recovering the knowledge they had lost. Now it is easier to transmit knowledge from one country to another than to transport their respective products and staples. And in fact, for some years now, the Greeks have added the commerce of science to their ordinary trade. From all over Europe, and particularly from France, they export books and knowledge just as they export cloth, metalwork, and other products of European industry. The only thing that prevents them from making this commerce as extensive as it could be is a certain apprehension of the government, a consideration dictated by prudence and by the way in which this government treats enlightenment. Such is the present state of Greece. Such are the sentiments of the present generation of modern Greeks. When I took up my pen in order to describe this state, a struggle began within me, which ended only when I put it down. Truth with a strict voice charged me with the duty of presenting the facts as they were. The motherland, bent under the yoke, lifted tear-filled eyes, and showing me her lacerated breast, conjured me, in return for having given me birth and education, not to reveal to the stranger's eye the truth even of her past state. I am justified in saying that I emerged victorious from this struggle, having betrayed neither truth nor the motherland. O truth, do not be afraid that I would soil my pen with lies. O my motherland, if I were tempted to speak ill of you, my pen would drop 1,000 times from my hands before writing a single word. Your past faults are no longer yours, and I recall them only in order to emphasize the more the merits of your present conduct. If never to fall is beautiful, a virtue more appropriate to man's nature is that he should attempt to rise up from a fall. Now that you are making efforts to rise up, what does it matter that a variety of circumstances precipitated you into a pit of misfortunes? The deeper this pit, the more your efforts to emerge from it will be appreciated, and the more glorious will be the success that must crown them. Your fall is one which many other peoples have also experienced. But if you continue to behave as you have been doing for the last few years, you supply to history's brush the first picture of a people's regeneration. The fall for which you have been so much reproached has not laid you so low as not to have left you some memory of your past greatness.
Kikini
second forerunner is Rigas Velesteinlis, also known as Rigas Phareos, a Greek writer, political thinker, and revolutionary active in the modern Greek Enlightenment. A victim of the Balkan uprising against the Ottoman Empire and a pioneer of the Greek War of Independence, Rigas Phareos is remembered as a Greek national hero. Around 1793, Rigas went to Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire and home to a large Greek community, as part of an effort to ask the French general Napoleon Bonaparte for assistance and support. While in the city, he edited a Greek-language newspaper, Ephemeris, the Daily, and published a proposed political map of Greater Greece, which included Constantinople and many other places, including a large number of places where Greeks were minority. He printed pamphlets based on the principles of the French Revolution, including the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and a new political constitution of the inhabitants of Rumeli, Asia Minor, the islands of the Aegean, and the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia. These he intended to distribute in an effort to stimulate a pan-Balkan uprising against the Ottomans. Rigas, using Demotiki rather than Katharevousa Greek, aroused the patriotic fervor of his Greek contemporaries. His republicanism was given an aura of heroism by his martyrdom, and set liberation of Greece in a context of political reform. In his famous Thurios, or war song, he urged the Greeks and other Orthodox Christian peoples living at the time in the area of Greece and generally the Balkans to leave the Ottoman-occupied towns for the mountains, where they could find freedom, organize, and fight against Ottoman tyranny. His call included also the Muslims of the empire, who disagreed and reacted against the Sultan's governance. It is noteworthy that he, unlike Korais, does not use the word Hellene or Grekos in his Thurios, but rather the word Romios. Let me give you a glimpse into his mind with his passionate words from the Revolutionary Proclamation for Law and Fatherland from 1797. To the people descended from the Greeks who inhabit Rumeli, Asia Minor, the Mediterranean islands, Wallachia and Moldavia, and all who groan under the most unbearable tyranny of the most abominable Ottoman despotism, or who have been forced to flee to foreign kingdoms, to escape its insupportable and burdensome yoke. All, I say, Christians and Turks, without any distinction of religion, since all are creatures of God and the children of the first man, who think that the tyrant, called the Sultan, wholly given over to his filthy, woman-obsessed appetites, surrounded by eunuchs and bloodthirsty and ignorant courtiers, has forgotten and despised humanity, has hardened his heart against innocence, and the most beautiful kingdom in the world, the Roman Empire, on all sides praised by the philosophers, has been reduced to a country of such abominable anarchy, where no one of whatever class or religion is assured either of his life, or of his honor, or of his property, but where the quietest, the most innocent, the most upright citizen is in danger of becoming, at any moment, a pitiable victim of the tyrant's imagination, or of the savage deputies and unworthy magnates of the tyrant, and finally, and this happens most frequently, of his most savage imitators, with their evil ways, delighting in unpunishable crime, in the most harsh inhumanity, in murder, without any examination, without any judgment. O heavens, you are the impartial witness of such evil deeds. O sun, you daily see such beastly effronteries. O earth, you are watered continuously by the streams of innocent blood. Who has the voice to contradict? This until now unfortunate people, I say, seeing that all its miseries and woes, its daily tears, its annihilation, driving from the bad and most vile government, from the absence of good laws, has resolved, taking courage once again, to look up to the heavens, to raise up manfully its overburdened neck, and furiously equipping its arms with the weapons of vengeance and despair, to shout out in a great shout before the whole Ecumeni, with a thunderous shout, the holy and blameless rights which are God-given, in order to live quietly in the earth. Therefore, so that all the inhabitants may unanimously and continuously compare, with tireless scrutiny, the activities of the government of the rulers with the objective of social legislation, manfully throwing off the worthless yoke of despotism and embracing the cherished freedom of their glorious forebears, so that they never allow themselves to be subjected in the future as slaves of the inhuman tyranny, so that each one may have, as a bright mirror before his eyes the basis of his liberty, his security, and his happiness, so that the judges manifestly may know what is their unavoidable obligation towards free citizens being judged, so that the lawmakers and the first people of the government may know the honest standard by which their calling must be measured and inspired for the happiness of the citizens, is publicly proclaimed the following public declaration of the cherished rights of man and the free inhabitants of the empire. And now the first of our leaders, Theodoros Kolokotronis, the preeminent military leader of the Greek War of Independence. His greatest success was the defeat of the Ottoman army under Mahmud Dramali Pasha at the Battle of Dervenakia in 1822. In 1825, he was appointed commander-in-chief of the Greek forces in the Peloponnese. Today, Kolokotronis ranks among the most prominent figures in modern Greek history. Prior to the Greek Revolution, Kolokotronis operated as a kleft, an armatolos, and as a kapos. In 1805, he joined the Russian Navy during the Russo-Turkish War. In 1806, Ottoman attacks against the klefts forced Kolokotronis to flee to the island of Zakynthos. When Zakynthos was occupied by the British, he obtained useful military experience while serving under the command of Richard Church, a Philhellene, in the 1st Regiment Greek Light Infantry. In 1810, Kolokotronis was promoted to the rank of major. From his service in the British Army, he adopted his characteristic red helmet. While in the Seven Islands, the Eptanissa, a French protectorate from 1807 to 1814, he came in contact with the revolutionary ideas of the era and was influenced by them. After the War of Independence, he became involved in the political life of the young Greek state and even ended up in prison. In the twilight of his life, Kolokotronis had learned to write in order to complete his memoirs, which have been a perennial favorite in Greece and have been translated several times in English and other languages. In his simple, down-to-earth manner, Kolokotronis captures the meaning of what he has experienced and presents it in an almost didactic manner. His summation of the situation in Greece on the eve of the war and the events of the French Revolution are quite memorable. He states, "Here ends my past life. At the commencement of the rising, whatever foreign service I had before entered into, I only entered it upon these conditions, that I was never to be sent far from the Seven Islands, never to fight except upon Turkish ground, and never to lay aside my national dress. In the islands I met with the Botzaris, and took Marcos for my adopted brother. In my youth, when I had time to learn, there were not many schools. There were only a few schools where I could learn reading and writing. The primates of the different districts hardly knew how to write their own names, and even archbishops knew scarcely anything beyond their ecclesiastical duties. They had studied nothing more than the Psaltir, the Oktoichos, the Book of the Months, and the Prophecies. They read no other books. It was not until I went to Zante that I met with the history of Greece. The books which I often read afterwards were the history of Greece, the tale of Aristomenes and Gorgo, and the story of Skanderbeg. According to my judgment, the French Revolution and the doings of Napoleon opened the eyes of the world. The nations knew nothing before, and the people thought that kings were gods upon the earth and that they were bound to say that whatever they did was well done. Through this present change, it is more difficult now to rule the people. In my time, commerce was very limited. Money was scarce. I gained 3 grossia on a dollar. It was thought a great thing if a person possessed 1,000 grossia. Anyone with such a sum could command as much service for it as he could not procure now for 1,000 Venetian florins. The community of men was small, and it was not until our rising that all the Greeks were brought into communication. There were men who knew of no place beyond a mile of their own locality. They thought of Zante, as we now speak, of the most distant parts of the world. America appears to us as Zante appeared to them. They said it was in France.
Έτσι κι εμείς ο αδελφοί να σηκωθούμε με ορμή. Έτσι κι εμείς ο αδελφοί να σηκωθούμε με ορμή. Εκδίκη συζητούντες τυράννους απολούμες για την ελευθερία με χαρά, ω παιδιά. Για την ελευθερία με χαρά, ω παιδιά. Αλέξανδρε, τώρα να βγεις από τον τάφο και να δεις. Αλέξανδρε, τώρα να βγεις από τον τάφο και να δεις. Τόρμα και δώνων πάλι τα αμβρία την μεγάλη, πως τους εχθρούς νικούν και πως ορμούν στη φωτιά. Πως τους εχθρούς νικούν και πως ορμούν στη φωτιά.
And now we come to Ioannis Kapodistrias, who is considered the founder of the modern Greek state and the architect of Greek independence. In 1799, when Russia and the Ottomans drove the French from the Ionian Islands and organized them into the Septinsular Republic, or the Republic of the Seven Islands, Kapodistrias participated in writing the new state's second constitution and became its Secretary of State. Upon entering the Russian Foreign Service in 1803, Kapodistrias became an expert on Balkan affairs. After attending the post-war Congress of Vienna as one of the Russian Tsar's representatives, Kapodistrias became a highly influential advisor. He did, however, develop doubts about the Tsar's toleration of Austrian policies and the influential statesman Metternich, who had a great antipathy for him. When Alexander refused to support the Greek revolt against the Turks, begun in March of 1821, Kapodistrias, who had a deep sympathy for the cause of Greek independence, although he had earlier refused to lead the major Greek revolutionary organization, found himself in an intolerable position. In 1822, therefore, he took an extended leave of absence from the Russian service and settled in Geneva, where he devoted himself to supplying material and moral relief to the Greek rebels until April 1827, when he was elected provisional president of Greece. A visitor to Kapodistrias in Geneva described him thus: "If there is to be found anywhere in the world an innate nobility marked by distinction of appearance, innocence and intelligence in the eyes, a graceful simplicity of manner, a natural elegance of expression in any language, no one could be more intrinsically aristocratic than Count Kapodistrias of Corfu." But beneath the veneer, Kapodistrias was a driven man dedicated to the re-education of his homeland. Like Korais, he too believed that education was the key to freedom. But to him it was a moral education that mattered most. In his 1819 address, Kapodistrias presents his arguments for the distinction in education that he feels will make a great difference for future generations of Greeks. He states, "Sons of our Holy Mother Church, we are all brethren. United by our common misfortunes, we are all bound to lend each other mutual assistance. Enlightened by the experience of our errors, henceforth formed in the school of the calamities which have resulted from them, and under which we succumb, we have already arrived at a certain degree of maturity, since we are all equally impressed with the happy conviction that we must give each other mutual aid, but without departing from the principles consecrated by the morality of that holy religion to which alone we owe our existence as a nation, through which we suffer under this title, entertain a profound sense of those sufferings, and experience the necessity of delivering ourselves from them forever. The march we have for some years pursued with the view of attaining this object is undoubtedly the true one. It is pointed out by the principles of the gospel. It exists in the nature of things. To do good to our countrymen through the sole love of good, and from no other motive to ameliorate thereby their present lot, and thus to prepare them from the great advantages of moral and Christian salvation. Not to trouble ourselves about creating this civilization on the basis of an arbitrary system, or adventitious circumstances, but to leave this grand work to that providence, which is alone the arbiter of nations. Such are in general the directions followed by those Greeks who are called by their devotion to the service of our country, some in employing themselves in the better education of their children, others in promoting by noble sacrifices literary views amongst us, and in supporting by their means the less fortunate amongst the young Greeks who frequent the academies of Europe. But literary education is not the only instruction which we require. Our country requires another. It is moral instruction which is wanted. Moral education ought on the one hand to have for its object to bring into prominent notice men worthy of the respect and the confidence of the nation, and on the other to accustom the nation gradually to respect, to listen to, and to believe in such men. If the epochs in which everything promised to our country the most honorable and happy future have passed away, leaving our best hopes unaccomplished, it is because the men of whom that country was to be composed were not yet qualified either to listen to the august voice of truth or to be listened to by the mass of our citizens. Scanty intelligence, an entire want of experience, an ignorance of the habits and manners of the world constituted in those days our whole patrimony. Life has no charms amid such dearth of means, when such is the habitual state of things. How then can we hope to escape from it, or to create a happier condition of life? The man who has shaken off the yoke may rapidly bend his mind to liberal conceptions, but in order to reduce these ideas to practice, more is required. His heart must be endowed with enlightened benevolence, which is taught by the gospel. Out of this sphere there can be no real good. Either liberal conceptions remain in the world of abstractions, and then they remain without effect, or else they become the instrument of ambition and of personal interest, when they lose all their attraction. Instead of securing attachment, they draw down the detestation of the people. Its civilization cannot advance. It retrogrades. Let us render to ourselves a faithful account of the events which fill up the half of our century. Let us examine the depths of our consciences with profound reflection. Let us scrutinize the consciences of those of our countrymen who have been enabled to render us any servants, and have neglected the great and splendid opportunities of doing so. And we shall be intimately convinced that, but for ignorance on the one hand, and this want of moral character on the other, the men most distinguished amongst our ancestors, favored by the circumstances of their times, would have bequeathed to us a less equivocal destiny and a progressive amelioration of our fate. Nevertheless, this amelioration commences. Its principal element consists in the credit which, for some years past, the truths which we have just traced have enjoyed amongst us. It is our duty now to cultivate with method and wisdom this happy tendency of our countrymen, and gradually to lead it to satisfactory results. One of the means which presents itself as it were spontaneously to the mind is that of associating in this grand work the efforts of the most enlightened and the best disposed among the Greeks. This association appears to exist. It is in conformity with the letter as well as with the spirit of Christian fraternity. However profane be the character in which attempts are made to clothe it, it is desirable that this association should not deviate from the aim we have pointed out above, and on which it is necessary again to fix our attention. We repeat, the Greeks must solely and exclusively occupy themselves with moral and literary education. Every other object is vain. Every other occupation is dangerous. The second important factor that Kapodistris considers is the idea of freedom as it relates to his world, which was a product of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. He knew that so much depended on the success of the modern Greek in several fields, but he specifically singles out commerce. Together with education, commerce provides a starting point for national service and a safeguard against abuses to the freedom of the citizen and the liberty of the nation. He continues, "Liberty is a science because it is founded upon principles. It is an art because the most elevated doctrine is not worth a good action, and because in affairs all is action. One must therefore be placed in the midst of freemen to learn to be free, both by the principle and in the fact. One must live sometime amidst a nation eminently Christian and religious, and thereby prosperous, to learn to be religious by sentiment as well as by discipline. The influential men of our country ought, therefore, not to lose sight of these observations. And in adopting them, they ought to take care that some of our young people should receive a good education in Russia, in Switzerland, in England, and in America. Commerce offers them a very propitious opportunity. Amongst these young men, one may select those who give the fairest promise by their talents as well as by their morals, and make them travel for a time in the countries which we have just mentioned. Once formed in these great schools, they must be summoned back and be provided with employment, either by investing them with public duties or by showing them confidence. The greater part of the Greeks who have distinguished themselves abroad find themselves on their return home out of place and employment. Struck with boredom and want of consideration, they grow impatient. They seek elsewhere an existence which they cannot enjoy in their native land. They leave it. They are lost to their country. The grand point is to preserve them and to make them work for her. This question in theory seems immensely difficult. It is easy from the moment it is considered under a practical point of view. Man exists but by one interest. The grand art consists in making him find one, and associating this interest with the interest of all. But there is not a village which does not offer a massive interest, especially those who are endowed with strong feeling and much imagination, and when national history can move the one and nourish the other. In occupying themselves with a part of the service of our country, those who are well disposed may be of great use to her, either in promoting the political education, so to speak, of the young men of great promise, or in making use of those who may have realized those promises by their observations while traveling abroad. These two branches of the national service require a point of contact, a common center of departure. The enlightened men amongst us who are well-disposed and sincere Christians will be able to form this center. In constantly giving to all our efforts this straight and moral direction, we fail in none of the duties which each of us has contracted towards the order of things existing in the country which contains our domestic hearths and the tomb of our fathers. And at the same time we fulfill loyally and honorably all the duties imposed on us by our holy religion. It commands from us the love of our neighbor still more than that of our countrymen. On the day when we shall depart from this line of conduct, when we shall embrace a different doctrine, our sacrifices will add to the misfortunes of our country. It will be then no longer the question of the public welfare, but the ambition and the vanity of some individuals to which the interests of our common country will be made subservient. We hope to steer clear of this great danger. The consequences of our errors still weigh on our heads.
Ας πέσει το γένος αυτόν, η δόξα το κράτος αχρίων τυράννων, ας πέσει το γένος αυτόν.
And I'll be back with more after the news from Greece.
Ακούτε Κόσμος FM ζωντανά από τα στούντιο Καλοειδή στην Αστόρια.
Η εκπομπή είναι μία προσφορά του United Brothers Fruit Market, γωνία 30th Avenue and 33rd Street στην Αστόρια. Ποικιλίες από φρέσκα φρούτα και λαχανικά σαν να είναι από τον κήπο σας. United Brothers Fruit Market. Ανοιχτά όλο το 24ωρο, 7 ημέρες την εβδομάδα με διαθέσιμο πάρκινγκ.
You're listening to Cosmos FM on the air at 91.5 and streaming live on www.cosmosfm.org. We'd like to remind you that the opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the Cosmos FM staff, producers, volunteers, or the Gaiapi's Board of Directors.
Και τώρα τα νέα από την Ελλάδα, την Αμερική και όλο τον κόσμο. Τα προγράμματα του Cosmos FM σας τα προσφέρουν μέλη του οργανισμού μας, καθώς και οι εταιρείες
Homeric Tours προσφέρει ταξίδια και διακοπές στην Ελλάδα, Κύπρο, Ανατολική Μεσόγειο και Κεντρική Ευρώπη. Με γραφεία στο Μανχάταν, Αστόρια, Hicksville, Long Island, Stamford, Connecticut και στην Αθήνα. Homeric Tours 1-800-223-5570.
Terrace on the Park, ο χώρος για τις κοινωνικές σας εκδηλώσεις με θέα όλη τη Νέα Υόρκη. Το Terrace on the Park προσφέρει υψηλής ποιότητας υπηρεσίες προσαρμοσμένες στις δικές σας επιθυμίες. Εμπειρία, υπηρεσίες και εγγύηση για οποιαδήποτε δεξίωσή σας. Terrace on the Park, στο Flushing. Τηλέφωνο 718 592 5000.
Χαίρετε κυρίες και κύριοι, είναι το δελτίο ειδήσεων του Sky με την Άσπα Παναγοπούλου. Εκτεταμένα επεισόδια απόψε στη Νέα Σμύρνη με 4 αστυνομικούς τραυματισμένους, οι 3 ελαφρά, ζημιές σε αυτοκίνητα και φωτιές σε κάδους. Κατά τη διάρκεια των επεισοδίων, κουκουλοφόροι κατάφεραν να απομονώσουν έναν αστυνομικό, τον οποίο έριξαν κάτω από τη μοτοσικλέτα του και άρχισαν να τον χτυπάνε με κλωτσιές, μπουνιές και καδρόνια. Ο αστυνομικός που φέρει τραύματα στα πόδια και το κεφάλι διακομίστηκε στο 401 στρατιωτικό νοσοκομείο και υποβάλλεται σε εξετάσεις. Σύμφωνα με τα πρώτα στοιχεία έχει διαφύγει τον κίνδυνο. Τον αστυνομικό επισκέπτονται στο 401 ο Υφυπουργός Προστασίας του Πολίτη Ελευθέρης Οικονόμου και ο αρχηγός της Ελλάς, αντιστράτηγος Μιχάλης Καραμαλάκης. Η αστυνομία έκανε γνωστό ότι υπάρχουν και άλλοι 3 αστυνομικοί τραυματίες, αλλά ελαφρά, και έδωσε στη δημοσιότητα φωτογραφίες που απεικονίζουν άτομα με μπετόβεργες μέσα στην πορεία, καθώς και σάκους με βόμβες μολότοφ που κατασχέθηκαν πριν από την πορεία. Έχουν γίνει 10 συλλήψεις. Αυτοσυγκράτηση και ψυχραιμία ζήτησε ο Πρωθυπουργός, αναφέροντας ότι οι θλιβερές εικόνες βίας που είδαμε όλοι απόψε πρέπει να είναι οι τελευταίες. Ζήτησε η ζωή του νεαρού αστυνομικού που κινδύνευσε απόψε να μας αφυπνήσει και απευθυνόμενος ειδικά στους νέους που, όπως είπε, είναι προορισμένοι να δημιουργούν, επισήμανε ότι η τυφλή οργή δεν οδηγεί πουθενά. Ο κ. Μητσοτάκης απευθύνθηκε και σε όσους, όπως είπε, επιχειρούν να σπείρουν το μίσος και το διχασμό στην κοινωνία για να καλύψουν το δικό τους αδιέξοδο. Τόνισε ότι δεν θα επιτρέψει σε κανένα να μας διχάσει. Επανέλαβε αυτό που είχε πει και το βράδυ των εκλογών, ότι είναι εδώ για να εγγυηθεί την ενότητα, την ασφάλεια και την ευημερία όλων των Ελλήνων. Δεν θα αφήσουμε κανένα να μας γυρίσει πίσω, είπε. Σε ανακοίνωσή του, ΣΥΡΙΖΑ καταδικάζει απερίφραστα τα επεισόδια και όσους επέλεξαν με πράξεις βίας να μαυρώσουν μια ειρηνική διαμαρτυρία χιλιάδων πολιτών της Νέας Μύρνης. Παράλληλα, καταδικάζει την επίθεση σε βάρος του άνδρα της ελληνικής αστυνομίας και τονίζει ότι η βία δεν απαντιέται με βία. Την επίθεση καταδικάζει το κίνημα αλλαγής, αναφέροντας ότι η κυβέρνηση και η αξιωματική αντιπολίτευση επιδίδονται σε ένα ρεσιτάλ ανευθυνότητας, στείνοντας ένα σκηνικό σύγκρουσης, πόλωσης και διχασμού, με θύματα τη δημόσια υγεία, την οικονομία, την κοινωνία και τελικά και τη δημοκρατική ομαλότητα. Αυτό το σκηνικό, αναφέρει το κίνημα αλλαγής, επιβάλλεται να ανατραπεί. Το Κομμουνιστικό Κόμμα αναφέρει ότι ο απαράδεκτος τραυματισμός του αστυνομικού σε καμία περίπτωση δεν αθωώνει την κυβέρνηση της Νέας Δημοκρατίας από τις ευθύνες που έχει για το κλίμα αστυνομοκρατίας που συνεχίζει να επιβάλλει. Νέο ρεκόρ για το 2021. 3.215 νέων κρουσμάτων κορονοϊού ανακοίνωσε σήμερα ο ΕΟΔΗ. Αύξηση καταγράφουν και οι διασωληνωμένοι που έφτασαν τους 484. 46 θάνατοι καταγράφηκαν το τελευταίο 24ωρο, ενώ από την έναρξη της επιδημίας έχουν καταγραφεί συνολικά 6.843 θάνατοι. Έγιναν 390 νέες εισαγωγές στα νοσοκομεία, καταγράφοντας αύξηση 15,73% σε σχέση με χθες. 1.572 κρούσματα καταγράφονται στην Αττική.
Ενημέρωση, ψυχαγωγία, πολιτισμός. Κόσμος FM.
And welcome back to Musical Masterworks, a special edition with your host Mike Stratis. We have been celebrating tonight the bicentennial of the Greek War of Independence with the words and thoughts of the forerunners and leaders on the eve of the Greek War of Independence. And now we come to the last of the leaders, Alexandros Ypsilantis, a Greek nationalist politician who is a member of a prominent Fanariotico Greek family, a prince of the Danubian principalities, a senior officer of the Imperial Russian cavalry during the Napoleonic Wars, and a leader of the Filiki Eteria, the secret organization that coordinated the beginning of the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Turk. Hailing from the Pontic Greek metropolis of Trapezunda, Ypsilantis was a dedicated patriot and fighter who, on the refusal of Kapodistris to accept the post of leader of the Eteria, was offered and elected to the leadership of the secret society. Following that, he processed and approved the general plan of the Greek War of Independence, which was revised during May of 1820 in Bucharest, with the participation of rebel captains from mainland Greece. The main points of the plan were to aid the simultaneous revolt of Serbs and Montenegrins, to provoke a revolt in Wallachia by also enlisting rebels from the Serbian lands, battle-hardened from the First and Second Serbian uprisings, to provoke civil unrest in Constantinople through the use of agents and burn the Ottoman fleet at the city's port, and to start the revolution in Greece and the Peloponnese after Ypsilantis' arrival there. He issued a declaration on the 8th of October 1820, announcing that he would soon be starting a revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Ypsilantis hoped that a revolt would ultimately lead to a Russian intervention. Therefore, on the 22nd of February 1821, accompanied by several other Greek officers in Russian service, Ypsilantis crossed the Pruth River at Skouleni into the principalities. 2 days later, at Iasi, he issued a proclamation announcing that he had the support of a great power, meaning Russia. Fight for faith and motherland. The time has come, O Hellenes. Long ago, the people of Europe, fighting for their own rights and liberties, invited us to imitation. These, although partially free, tried with all their strength to increase their freedom, and through this all their prosperity. Our brethren and friends are everywhere ready. The Serbs, the Suliotes, and the whole of Epirus bearing arms await us. Let us then unite with enthusiasm. The motherland is calling us. Europe, fixing its eyes upon us, wonders at our inertia. Let all the mountains of Greece resound, therefore, with the echo of our battle trumpet, and the valleys with the fearful clash of our arms. Europe will admire our valor. Our tyrants, trembling and pale, will flee before us. The enlightened peoples of Europe are occupied in restoring the same well-being, and full of gratitude for the benefactions of our forefathers towards them, desire the liberation of Greece. We, seemingly worthy of ancestral virtue and of the present century, are hopeful that we will achieve their defense and help. Many of these freedom lovers want to come and fight alongside us. Move, O friends, and you will see a mighty empire defend our rights. You will see even many of our enemies, moved by our just cause, turn their backs to the enemy and unite with us. Let them approach with a sincere spirit. The motherland will embrace them. Who then hinders your manly arms? Our cowardly enemy is sick and weak. Our generals are experienced, and all our fellow countrymen are full of enthusiasm. Unite then, O brave and magnanimous Greeks. Let national phalanxes be formed. Let patriotic legions appear, and you will see those old giants of despotism fall by themselves before our triumphant banners. All the shores of the Ionian and Aegean seas will resound to the sound of our trumpet. Greek ships, which in time of peace have known both how to trade and to fight, will sow terror and death by fire and the sword in all the harbors of the tyrant. What Greek soul will be indifferent to the invitation of the motherland? In Rome, a friend of Caesar, shaking the bloody mantle of the tyrant, raised up the people. What will you do, O Greeks, to whom the motherland naked shows its wounds, and with broken voice calls on the help of its children? Divine Providence, O friends and fellow countrymen, having pity on our misfortunes, has granted the means, so that with a little effort we can enjoy every benefit with freedom. If then out of culpable stupidity we are indifferent, the tyrant, becoming wilder, will multiply our sufferings, and we will become forever the most unfortunate of all nations. Turn your eyes, O fellow countrymen, and behold our miserable state. See here the ruined churches. There our children seized for the shameless use of the shameless hedonism of our barbarous tyrants. Our houses stripped bare, our fields laid waste, and ourselves miserable slaves. It is time to overthrow this insufferable yoke, to liberate the motherland, to throw down the Turkish crescent from the clouds in order to raise up the symbol by which we always conquer, I mean the cross, and thus rid the motherland and our Orthodox faith from the impious scorn of the heathen. Among ourselves, the most noble is he who bravely defends the rights of the motherland and works for it in a beneficial way. The nation assembled will elect its rulers, and to this highest parliament all our acts will yield. Let us move them with a common spirit. Let the wealthy give up part of their own property. Let the holy shepherds instill in the peace their own example, and let the educated advise what is beneficial. Those fellow countrymen serving as soldiers and civilians at foreign courts, giving thanks to the power for which each works, let them all rush to the great and brilliant career already opened up, and let them offer to the motherland the debt they owe. And as brave men, let us all take up arms without wasting time with the unconquerable weapon of bravery, and I promise you in a short while victory, and after victory everything that is good. What bought and indolent slaves dare to oppose themselves to a people fighting for its own independence? The heroic struggles of our forefathers are witnesses. Spain, who first and by herself put to rout the invincible phalanxes of a tyrant, is a witness. Fellow countrymen, with unity, with respect for holy religion, with obedience to the laws and the generals, with boldness and steadfastness, our victory is certain and inevitable. This will crown with evergreen laurels our heroic struggles. This, with ineffaceable characters, will carve our names in the temple of immortality. for the example of future generations. The motherland will reward her obedient and generous children with the prizes of glory and honor. Those who disobey and turn a deaf ear to this present appeal will be declared bastards and Asiatic blights, their names as traitors, anathematized and cursed by later generations. Let us then once again, O brave and magnanimous Greeks, invite liberty to the classical land of Greece. Let us do battle between Marathon and Thermopylae. Let us fight on the tombs of our fathers who, as to leave us free, fought and died there. The blood of the tyrants is acceptable to the shades of Epaminondas the Theban and of Thrasybulus the Athenian, who crushed the 30 tyrants, to the shades of Harmodius and Aristogiton, who destroyed the yoke of Pisistratus, to that of Timoleon, who restored freedom to Corinth and Syracuse, certainly to those of Miltiades and Themistocles, of Leonidas and the 300, who cut down the innumerable armies of the barbarous Persians, whose most barbarous and inhuman descendants we today, with very little effort, are about to annihilate completely. To arms then, friends, the motherland calls us. So, you have been listening to a special edition of Musical Masterworks with your host, Mike Stratis. I hope you enjoyed tonight's offering of the words and thoughts of the forerunners and leaders on the eve of the Greek War of Independence. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to call us at 718-204-8900. I'll be back again in 2 weeks with more on the bicentennial of Greek independence. Until then, have a wonderful night.
Το σημερινό πρόγραμμα ήταν μια προσφορά των εταιριών
Αντένα ΣΑΤ, το ελληνικό κανάλι στην Αμερική. Όλες οι τελευταίες ειδήσεις από την Ελλάδα και τον κόσμο. Ψυχαγωγικές εκπομπές, ελληνικές σειρές και το ελληνικό ποδόσφαιρο. Ο Αντένα ΣΑΤ είναι διαθέσιμος από το Greek Elite Pack της Dish με πολλά ελληνικά κανάλια σε ολόκληρη την Αμερική από την Dish.
Στην Investors Bank, στόχος μας είναι να βλέπουμε τις επιχειρήσεις σας να προοδεύουν. Είτε χρειάζεστε δάνειο για να ανανεώσετε τον εξοπλισμό σας, είτε credit line, είτε χρηματοδότηση για αγορά ακινήτου, η Investors Bank είναι εδώ για να σας βοηθήσει. Πληροφορίες στο 855-422-6548 ή στο διαδίκτυο www.myinvestorsbank.com. Investors Bank. Banking in your best interest. Member FDIC. Equal Housing Lender. NMLS ID number 41179. New Greek TV, η ελληνική τηλεόραση της Ομογένειας που για περισσότερο από 29 χρόνια είναι κοντά στους Ελληνοαμερικανούς της Νέας Υόρκης. Νέα ελληνική τηλεόραση. Έρχεται καθημερινά κοντά σας ανανεωμένη στην Time Warner, κανάλι 1600, RCN, κανάλι 523. Πληροφορίες για νέους συνδρομητές www.newgreektv.com και 718-726-0900. Νέα ελληνική τηλεόραση. Η φωνή των Ελλήνων της Αμερικής.
This broadcast of Cosmos FM is paid for by the Greek American Educational Public Information System, Incorporated.
Η συχνότητα του ελληνισμού στη Νέα Υόρκη. Κόσμος FM.